Hey my dear friends, now you know what's puer tea. Yes, puer tea is a geographic product, exclusively produced only here in Yunnan, processed especially from large individual species, conveniently laced balsamic, with a high concentration and well-balanced biocompounds. Puer tea has several unique skills, like fixation with comparatively low temperature, drying with low temperature, sun drying for the loose tea, which is material for both the raw puer tea and the ripe puer tea, steam and compressed, piling fermentation, storage, and so on. Because of all of those complicated and time-consumed, also labor-intensive job, puer tea is beloved for both its rich and rounded flavor, also for the both beneficial functions. We can either buy the puer tea, the aged puer tea directly, or purchase some young puer tea and store them properly for future sales or personal drink. However, my question is, can all the puer tea be able to be aged over time with better quality? Not really. So, through today's lesson, we are going to figure it out how and why. Let's go.
Lesson 10. Processing of puer tea. 普洱茶的工艺. Puer tea overseas is often spelled as Puerh. However, in the national standard, puer tea is spelled as Puer. Since puer tea is exclusively originated here only in China, in any other places there's no such tea, so I would prefer still use the word Puer pinyin to describe such special and unique type of tea. And Puer actually is also the city's name. To distinguish it from the tea, we use P, U, R, yes, to describe it is a city. And since Puer and Puer city, they are closely related. While in history, was puer tea only produced in Puer city? That's an interesting question. Yes, we can discuss that in future, because today we have a lot to learn, okay? Also, next lesson, we have already introduced a little bit about puer tea. In history, puer tea was classified as dark tea. That's because, yes indeed, dark tea and puer tea share something similar. They all been through 3 steps. First, primary process, which means that they need some material. The second is refining process. The third is very important, is storage. However, dark tea needs dark material, which especially been through pioneering scale. For puer tea, it needs sun-dried 毛茶. Sun-dried 毛茶. Okay, so you can see it is material for both raw puer tea and ripe puer tea. So, someone would ask, since the sun-dried 毛茶 is different from dark material, this tea is green tea. After all, plucking, spreading, fixation, rolling, and drying, very similar to green tea. So, is this the sun-dried green tea? I know, in the market, it's very confusing because we have learned in green tea lessons that the green tea has 4 categories, and one of them is sun-dried green tea. Is this a sun-dried green tea? No. Why? That's because green tea usually we enjoy its freshness, even it is dried by the sunlight. However, it has a typical green tea character. We enjoy the freshness. For sun-dried 毛茶, which is a typical exclusive material for pu'er tea. It tastes not like green tea, which has freshness, vegetable, some green bean, or some chestnuts. Instead, we enjoy the pleasant floral, woody, and like some honey aroma. The flavor is very mild, but the taste, yes, is very strong. So next time, whenever you smell such sun-dried malta or the fresh raw pu'er tea, either smell like green tea or taste like green tea, be aware of that, because usually green tea cannot be stored and aged when it's better quality, okay? So how to process sun-dried malta? First is to pluck the fresh leaves. You may already realize that for all those rich and strong teas, usually we harvest the mature leaves. So for pu'er tea, usually we harvest one bud and two leaves, but most likely we also harvest 3 or 4 leaves, especially in the optimal season when the leaves are very precious. Well, again, Latin tree species, they are very soft, so that's okay, even we pick 3 leaves. And one more thing is that if somebody said that this is ancient tea tree that harvested and produced in early March or in March, most likely it's a fake ancient tea. Maybe some modern tea gardens or some small leaf tea trees in low altitude, the weather is warmer, so they pick the leaves and make the tea in March. But most likely in the whole Yunnan, only in April they started to produce the ancient tea, especially after the Tomb Sweeping Festival. Okay, so if you want to visit Yunnan to experience tea making, especially to see how local people, they produce the tea, April is the best time. Don't mention in April, we have lots of festivals, so we can join them either for harvesting and the celebration, okay? So after picking the leaves has some grassy aroma, grassy smell, especially it has a high water moisture. In that case, we cannot produce the tea right away. So we have to spread those leaves to firstly reduce some of the water, right? When it's too high, it's hard to make. The tea leaves may get burned, but without being fixated properly. So we have to spread those leaves, lose some water, get the leaves dried a little bit and soft. Meanwhile, this is processed to release some grass smell and meanwhile form very nice and pleasant fragrances. By doing this, this is also for those tea leaves to get ready. And usually the tea farmers, especially experienced one, they would observe the color changing, the appearance of the tea, especially the smell, so they know that it's ready. In the tea mountain, you may hear very often that they call this step as 萎凋, withering. Withering, okay? Because both 萎凋 and spreading, they share something similar. They share the similar method. However, they are designed differently. And for spreading, most likely they lose some water and develop some nice aroma, but there has very little biochemical reactions. While for withering, it is designed on purpose to cause the enzymatic reactions. So for white tea, oolong tea, and black tea, the reactions start as early as withering step. However, for pu'er tea, we should avoid any pre-reactions because we store the pu'er tea. We wish the pu'er tea would have aging potential. If the pu'er tea already get oxidized, means some of those biocompounds are consumed, so that will minimize the aging potential. So now you may hear very often, to have the qualified pu'er tea, the tea leaves should not have any either the earlier oxidation or fermentation, 前发酵或者是前氧化. It's not allowed. However, I know in the mountain, Many tea farmers, they do this on purpose. Why? Because authentic processing, usually it would be very strong. And in that case, if they want to sell you the new tea, it is very strong, bitter, and pungent. For customers, they don't buy. And since they want to have the cash flow, they want you to drink the young puer tea. Definitely, they would make the tea more mild, more pleasant, and less bitter, less astringent. So you are going to buy for that, and they will also encourage you to drink. I know this is a conflict. Tea farmers, they harvest the tea and they want to sell all of the tea cakes. But it's wrong. Actually, even the tea farmers, now, they do not drink the current years very often or in big amount because they know that it's very strong and harmful to our body. So how do we know such tea had the pre-oxidation? If you smell something, especially like the honey aroma, which is sweet, and you steep the tea regularly, and the tea's liqueur is in yellow color, golden color, most likely this is the tea that has been pre-oxidized. So that will lose some of the aging potential, which means that after store the tea for many years, this tea cannot reach its excellence. Okay. I know it's very hard to tell. And even in history, the people, they did wither the tea. And the pile the tea to cause some oxidation. That's because in ancient time, the technology was not advanced enough and the machine or processing was not mature enough, okay? And after that, after leaves are soft and ready for the fixation, yes, we can either fix the tea either by hand or machine. You can see, very similar to green tea, yes, indeed. And this is one of our friends, Tiago, okay. When we visited the Tea Mountain in 2022, I hope next time you would join us. So, in the tea season, even for some ancient tea trees, they are fixated by machine because there are lots of the materials. If we do not process them, all of the leaves will be ruined. So, the machine is often used. While in the market, you may hear that this is artisan tea. So the question is that artisan tea is better than machine-made? Not really. Only if the tea is carefully processed by an experienced person or tea master, yes, because they know how to adjust the method, the length, the temperature, either to spread the tea leaves or pile them, or drop the temperature or increase the hot heatiness. Yes, that's okay. And imagine me, even I know how to make the tea. Of course, I have no rich experience. I cannot make very good tea. So, for some machine, because based on lots of experience, the machine has designed with proper measurement. So the machine are able to produce the tea very evenly because machine never feel tired. While people, they can feel tired, of course. And how do we know the tea is well fixated? To observe the leaves and smell the leaves, also to touch the leaves when it is very sticky, while they break the stem of the tea. If it is well processed, yes, it is usually very flexible, just like rubber. We can play and you cannot break it. Also, you smell some very pleasant aromas, yes. So it's very important if you really come to the tea mountains and try this process, okay? The process, yes, is very similar to green tea to fixate the tea evenly and properly. And do you still remember the purpose? To inactivate those enzymes. However, for puer tea, because those leaves are more mature than green tea, and usually we put more of those leaves in the machine or the rock. So the temperature of the leaves cannot increase high enough over 80. Usually it is around 65 Celsius degree. Okay. sometimes can be 70. So you can see, although this temperature is able to inactivate most of those enzymes, but still, there's a little part of the enzymes has been passivated, so that is a significant difference between processed sun-dried matcha and green tea. If we make the temperature of the tea leaves over 80 degrees, all of the enzymes would be activated, and meanwhile, some microbes would be killed, so the tea would lose its life. Means such tea cannot be stored and aged. That's why for green tea usually we only enjoy its refreshness because they cannot be stored, be aged when it's better quality. Okay, and yes, so after fixation, those leaves will be spread again, of course, because it is very hot. If we roll those leaves right away after fixation, while the leaves are still quite dry and hot, we are going to break those leaves. So that will make the tea infusion cloudy. Next time when you drink tea, if you see the tea's liquor is cloudy, possibly because the leaves were rolled while it is still hot. So how to do? We would spread the leaves after fixation. Then the leaves would cool down and absorb some moisture, so they would get soft. Then we can roll those leaves. Only in that case, the leaves will be rolled properly without breaking those whole leaves. And the purpose of rolling is to break the cells, okay? Not the leaves, to break the wall of the cells. So those juice will be stronger while we steep the tea. That makes the flavor more richer. And meanwhile, also most importantly, this is a chance that for those microbes to grow, for those microbes to stay in the tea leaves. If you could remember in last lesson, we introduced that in the tea garden, those microbes, they achieve the tea in 3 ways. The first is for the cultivation, because the microbes can help with photosynthesis. Second is for the roots to absorb the nutrients, especially for the nitrogen. And also microbes would assist with processing. And rolling is one of the stage. It is for the convenience of microbial inoculation, because primary processing, primary factories, they are close to the tea gardens. And in the tea gardens around the areas, they still have those groups of those wild microbes. And they can stay, okay? This is to provide a process for them to stay, okay? So after that, those leaves will be dried. How? Since it's called sun drying, of course, those leaves will be dried in the sunlight. Ideally, they should be put outdoor without the shade. However, it's common in the mountains that you see there are lots of such roof with the shade. Why? Of course, because even in the springtime, it's a dry season. Occasionally, it is still rain and could be cloudy, so it's very risky if without such a shade and roof. That's why this room actually is very hot. In tea harvest time, whenever we enter such room, just like you are having the sauna. So cherish the tea because it is a really labor-intensive job. The qualified tea should be dried within 1 day. Usually, they harvest the tea leaves and processing them at night, and the next morning, they would dry them. And at night, they start to collect the dry leaves, okay? However, sometimes it's unavoidably, it's a rainy day, it's a cloudy day. So what shall they do? Because they cannot dry the leaves. They are going to dry those leaves by heater, but they have to control the heatness no higher than 45 Celsius degree. That's why sometimes when you drink the tea liquor is cloudy, okay, without luminous color, because that tea might be processed in rainy day or cloudy day. And this is how we could have some clue why the tea's color is yellow, I'm talking about the young puer tea, the current year, because it is withered with oxidization, so there has no numerous greenish color. And such tea doesn't have refreshing bitterness, while very sweet, especially like some honey or some fruity sweetness, because it is withered. So that is some clue for you. Such tea cannot be stored with excellent quality. And if the tea liqueur has some cloudy, it might be because, yes, the tea leaves are rolled when they are still hot. While if you smell something like moisture or dampness, and the tea liqueur is cloudy with dull color, possibly because such tea is dried in cloudy or rainy weather. Okay, so meanwhile, drying is to dry the leaves and fix their shapes, their color and quality. And meanwhile, this is another chance. Again, such primary tea factory, they are very close to the tea garden with the consistent group of microbes. Okay, so this is another chance again for microbial inoculation. That's why puer tea can be fermented, because when we grow the tea and process the tea, they already have lots of those microbes in the tea leaves. They are sleeping. They behave like seeds. During storage, when the environment is ready, ideally, so they are going to grow and work on the tea fermentation. Okay, and so this is how to process the sun-dried matcha. And for ripe puer tea, there has one more extra step, that is pioneer fermentation. We have learned briefly that this pioneer fermentation actually is very new, only half a century ago. Why? Because before the puer tea was very popular, usually drank in Hong Kong, Macau, Malaysia, and Guangzhou. So local people, they had already used to such aged tea. Since they had to wait over 10 years, even longer, they were thinking that maybe they could artificially ferment the tea. So in the earlier of last century, they had already tried the processing. Until in 1970s, the China Tea Company, they sent people there in Guangzhou to learn the skills. And at that time, local people, they used the hot water. While they returned to Yunnan, they couldn't succeed by using the hot water. However, they never gave up. That is the spirit of China. So with 2 years research and practice, finally, they invented the pioneer fermentation successfully. And that's why we consider 1975 is the crucial year for ripe puer tea. Also, some of the skills could be earlier, like the 74 and 52. This is one classic ripe puer tea. Such a recipe was invented in the year of 1954. So how did they do? What happened during the pioneer fermentation? During the pioneer fermentation, those leaves are watered. Usually put 25 to 30% of the total amount of the tea. So the leaves are very wet, while pile them together. The leaves are wet and warm during such a long period of 1 month, sometimes could over 2 months. Yes, lots of microbes, they would grow. Those microbes, first from the tea trees, secondly from the processing stage, thirdly now from those surrounding areas, and maybe the water that gets the tea wet. That's why in Menghai is considered the county for the excellent puer tea, excellent ripe puer tea, because in Menghai County, in the environment, there has a rich, abundant group of those beneficial microorganisms. And when you go to Huanghai, there are over 1,000 of those tea factories producing ripe puer tea. Now, there has both traditional pile fermentation with large pile and smaller size for shorter time. Okay, so the key is microbes. How you're going to allow those microbes to grow? That is the key, as long as you could solve the problem and provide the condition that microbes can grow. No problem. That's why one more thing is that they only have 10 kilograms of the ancient puer tea, the ancient material. For example, 老班章, you know 老班章 is super expensive, right? Definitely, they cannot have over tons of such material. So how they are going to get those 10 kilograms of mao cha be fermented? Yes, they would put the 10 kilograms 老班章 tea leaves in the center of the traditional pile. So those microbes in surrounding other piles would work on the 10 kilograms at the end. Even only 10 kilograms, they would also be properly and well fermented. Okay, so during this long period, it is long enough those microbes, they would grow and ferment the tea. Meanwhile, we should pay attention to that. Because it is wet and warm, unavoidably, there has the wetnization, right? And meanwhile, during the fixation, because temperature is comparatively low, so there has part of residual enzymes. Therefore, during the pile fermentation, actually, there are series of comprehensive reactions happening under the functions of microbes, enzyme, thermalization, coarse activation, and fermentation. Those microbes, of course, take the major fermentation job. Then you may also ask, since we cannot store the tea in somewhere wet and warm, how could such leaves are kept in such environment while it is still safe? That's a good question because the market also questions ripe puer tea that it is unsafe and might be toxic. Actually, during the whole pile fermentation, everything is under monitored. And during the whole process, the tea leaves has been through different stages and been turned over several times to ensure that those leaves get fermented properly. And you should also have the knowledge that only if the things like some seeds or food has high content of sugar, protein, and fatness. Yes, such things will get bad when stored in somewhere wet and warm. While puer tea has no concentration of either sugar, protein, or fatness. Okay, don't mention tea polyphenols has a feature of antibacterials. I visited the tea factory very often. I quite enjoy to be in the center of those piles. Why? Because I feel like I could have some engagement with those microbes. They touch my face very gracefully, and I could have some game with them. Like I could whisper with them, and in a room, the temperature is over 30 Celsius degrees. I feel warm and comfortable. I can smell the aging aromas. Yes, at the first stage, when 7 to 10 days, the leaves start the fermentation. You may see there are lots of gray hairs. So you may concern that. But you should also know that for microorganisms, there are good ones and there are bad ones. So those are the good heroes achieving the fermentation. Okay. Of course, during the whole pile fermentation, it's unavoidable. There may have some neutral or not so good bacteria. Yeah. So we do not drink the newly made ripe puer tea. Before I tried, I had experienced that I got inflammation either because the freshly made ripe puer tea is too hot or there had some impure bacteria. Okay, so we have to be patient and wait for some time. Then we can enjoy the taste. They also had experiments that in Yunnan Agricultural University, the professor put the dyed microbes into the tea on purpose, and in a few weeks, they tested tea again. They couldn't find any of them because they were dyed or they have been killed by the beneficial ones. So don't worry, okay? Then, since ripe puer tea is the result of accelerate the aging process, can raw puer tea become ripe puer tea after stored for many years? Many people, they think so. Not really. First, let's see the foundational material. Yes, they are sun-dried matcha. That's okay. However, ripe puer tea is powerfully fermented during such extreme designed environment on purpose, while raw puer tea during storage is stored somewhere clean, dry, and comparatively cool, which means that they have different environment. How environment could change them? In March, there had twin brothers, John and Michael. They were adopted by two families. One family in London is very rich, and they put John in their private school and provide the excellent education, while another boy, Michael is a very common name, was adopted by a family in the countryside. They may not be rich. Even they could be poor. So they could only put this boy in the public school and provide something necessary but not so rich. So you could imagine at the end, the twin brothers would turn to be differently, and they would have different career, maybe different characters, and different life. The same for raw puer tea and ripe puer tea. With different environment, yes, they were going to have different mechanism or pathways for the aging process. So no matter how many years you store the raw puer tea will get old, while never turn to be ripe puer tea. Now you understand? Wonderfully. Okay, so since the environment is very important, how should we provide a good environment for the tea to grow, both for ripe puer tea and raw puer tea? Yes. With the materials like the sun-dried matcha, first of all, we need to purify those tea leaves, get rid of some impurity, like the stone, hair, some bugs, even the old stem, or even some seeds, stolen. And after that, usually, especially for traditional cakes, or now in the market, people, they prefer some pure tea from the single tea garden or even the single trees. But the best purity is still from the blended recipe. That will keep the consistent and stable quality. Also combine and balance, makes the tea has a rich aroma and complex taste. And after that, the tea will be steamed, so the leaves will get soft. Then put in the bag, and compress that emulsion. Okay, after they get dried, those cakes will be wrapped by the paper, and this usually is done. And then finally packed by the bamboo shoot skin. Both the paper and bamboo shoot shell can help with breathing some proper oxygen, help with aging mildly. Okay. And for the ripe puer tea, there has one more extra step. That is, yes, pound fermentation. Then we get the loose ripe puer tea. I know in the market, someone also sells the loose ripe puer tea. Yes, it is still considered as puer tea because it is fermented, mild. Okay. However, again, I do not recommend. Why? Because without steaming and without purifying and steaming, can be dusty or with some impurities. So steaming and compression is very necessary and essential. Okay, and you may also ask, maybe you said the puer tea should avoid any high temperature, while the steam, the temperature is very high, so that will ruin the tea? It's a very good question. Although the steam is very hot, have you ever get hurt by steam? However, during this step, it takes only around 10 seconds. Sometimes could be 80 seconds, sometimes could be 12, 15 seconds. So it is very short. In that case, those microbes and a little bit of those enzymes are still alive, okay? In that case, don't worry. And someone also confused that, why could the tea stick together? Don't you put any additive inside? Of course, no. It's totally natural and healthy. Why they could stick together when they are soft? Because the tea has sugar or some packaging. That's why they can stick together. And you can also say that the whole process cannot be done by machine. Also now modern machine is being adopted for processing. So puer tea is a labor-intensive and time-consumed. That's why please cherish. That's why puer tea is quite complicated. Each step matters. Okay. So after we get the 桑臻毛茶 and refining, which are the second stage, the last stage is to store the puer tea. And how? Usually we would store the tea somewhere around 20 to 26 Celsius degree and humid around 50, okay? Around 50. And around 50, no more than 80. If you put the tea somewhere over 80 for several days, the tea will get ruined. And also, we encourage you to put the tea somewhere in stable condition. It doesn't mean that you always keep the condition the same. Imagine why we love puer tea, because puer tea is rich in lots of wisdom and life philosophy. So I often compare puer tea as we human beings. We people have our different stages, like childhood or some teenagers or being young, enter the middle age, and finally we would get old. So at different stages, we are different. We should be taken care of differently, okay, accordingly. So for the tea, usually if the puer tea are young, yes, we can put the tea somewhere hot and wet, no problem, because that is to accelerate the aging process a little bit faster. However, when the tea gets older and older, we should keep the room cooler and drier. Let the tea get fermented mildly and gracefully. Okay, so of course, the rule number one, always avoid the direct sunlight. It's a killer. It's an enemy of all the teas. So in the tea exposition, whenever you see someone, they just put those tea on the shelf directly, even without any packaging. No, most likely they are fake. They are fake, okay? And of course, keep the room clean and clear, okay? One more thing is that to separate the raw puer tea and the ripe puer tea. Why? Again, raw puer tea and the ripe puer tea, they have different pathways to ferment. So you would not put the musicians and the painters together. Also, they possibly would have some mature classes, but for teaching them skills, definitely you would not put them in one classroom, right? So the raw puer tea would go their own way and the ripe puer tea would go another way, okay? Just let them be themselves. Like you are going to be yourself. You do not like others. You do not pretend to be others. And you do not want to be someone else. Just be yourself, okay? So this is how we should store the puer tea. And in that case, we have 4 conditions. Which one's yours? The first one? I think this is very common for most of our tea friends, as far as I know. Say this one, even those cakes are outdoor without packaging, usually at least we put such tea, yes, like here, for example, I have some tea. For example, at least put a single tea in such anti-humidity, anti-the bite smells. Okay, put the tea in such Ziploc. The Ziploc bags. It's cheap, but could be really good. Okay, and then separate the raw puer tea and ripe puer tea. Thirdly, sell them and put them somewhere dark. Okay. How about the second one? How about the second one? Yes, it's better. After all, those single cakes are sealed in the boxing. However, it is too bright. Well, this is usually the warehouse for some tea space, tea house, or tea shop. They sell the tea very common, just transitional warehouse. So they move the tea leaves very quickly. That's all right. How about the third one? This one is very common in the tea factories. And we see lots of those boxes and the tea are well sealed in the room. Is this ideal? Optimal? Not really, because such place is too big, too open, too spacious. So those microbes are very hard to grow. Again, those microbes usually they grow somewhere wet and dark, right? So if you have ever visited any wineries, their tea cellars is usually underground. The room is dark. They have a very weak light. So the tea cellar imitate the conditions as a wine cellar, which has dark rooms, and they also imitate the environment to ensure that those microbes, they would like these places, and then they are going to grow. If they like the environment, of course, they are going to settle down and have the children's generation. So all of those microbes would work on the teas. And of course, you could always keep an eye on the environment for the humidity, for the temperature, even the oxygen. Even you keep your tea in your own room, and to make sure that those boxes are away from the roof, the floor, and the wall, keep at least 15 to 20 centimeters far away from the roof, the floor, and the wall. And every 6 months, or every season, you are going to turn over and put those boxes as bottom on the top, so they are well fermented and evenly aged. Okay. In general, this is a picture to show you the raw puer tea, how the color changes from it is very young to quite old. Okay. Even for this one, this is not new. I think this is 3 to 5 years old. Okay. So here has 2 tables to indicate you the trend. Again, this is not precise because without different environment, the trend with precise years would be different. So the 2 tables only give the idea how the tea would grow. We know puer tea can be aged, which means that this tea can grow better. But how long? Again, for all of those things, there has a life cycle. They would grow, then after reaching the peak or high points, they would decline. Yes. So for puer tea, the quality would grow gradually until reach the ideal drinking window. Then they would go down. In general, if the tea is stored in dry warehouse, so the quality will be better. Also, the fermentation is slower, but better. Okay, so that is why now in market, especially young generation, they prefer the tea be stored naturally here in Kunming because the aroma is better. However, it takes at least 15 years. I've tried some tea stored here over 10 years. They still have the green parts with astringency. For the tea, we have loose leaves and those cakes, right? Those cakes. Why should we keep them in bigger size and in the whole compressed cakes or some bricks? Why? Because that again will allow the tea to ferment slowly, mildly, and gracefully. Those microbes, they favorite the environment with very little oxygen. So this brings us the question once I asked. Someone asked why the sun-dried Maocha cannot be called puer tea. Imagine such loose leaf. Even we store such in a box, there has lots of oxygen. Such oxygen will avoid of those beneficial microbes to grow, especially for some special group of those microbes to grow. So the pathways of the loose leaf to be aged is different from such compressed cakes that usually result the loose leaves and the compressed tea taste differently. This means that although the loose leaves, they are oxidized and aged, but they are not fermented. So, since such tea are not being fermented, it cannot be called technically puer tea. So, to be short, natural dry warehouse result in better quality. Wet warehouse shorten the life shelf, also it's fast. And compressed tea has better quality and longer optimal drinking window. Yes, means the ideal drinking years could be longer. So how exactly to store the tea? I'm telling you, this is a real puzzle, just like the theme is hard to see. Different people with different experience, they would have different formula. So this is also the part that puer tea lovers, they like. The puer tea market is still very young so far. We haven't have enough data to design such model to tell you exactly those years or some numbers, okay? But definitely if you follow the basic rules I introduced, at least those tea won't be get ruined. Okay, so now in China, even in the whole Chinese community, they have different groups of preference. Like young generation, they would prefer the natural dry house in Kunming, while the traditional tea lovers, they still like Guangdong, Dongguan, Shenzhen, even Macau or Malaysia. In the traditional market, the tea could also be stored on purpose or naturally. That will also result in different flavors and quality. In the original warehouses, like in Banna and Puer, definitely one is very hot and wet, while Puer, it is cooler and drier. But in Puer, there are more those forests provide maybe more microbes. So you could imagine the quality will turn to be different as well. And also there's some group of people, they think that since the tea should be stored somewhere dry, then why store them in the North China? During the winter time, it is dry and cool, while during the summertime, it's hot. I don't know. I'm telling you, this is very interesting part that even the same batches, if we store them in different warehouses, yes, they are going to vary differently. That's the interesting part. However, we encourage all of those tea should be stored here in the original places in Yunnan for at least 3 or 5 years So comparing to we people, when we were young, yes, we stay with the parents until we learn some experience, we have the knowledge, we also are independent, we can leave our parents and to work or study in other cities, right? So for those poverty, when they're still young, while transported in other cities, you are taking their parents away, and that won't good for their growth. Let me think. For some children, adopted children, they could be still happy. Maybe, however, most of the children, they prefer their original parents and family. Okay. So this is the fun part I'd like to always share with our friends. All the lessons are in theory. I'd like to meet you face to face, no matter it's online or in person, to discuss all of those puzzles and philosophies while drink the tea. Okay, so you're welcome to join our courses or tea tour or the internship. Yeah, after 2 lessons, I think you have your own answer. Does puer tea belong to the type of dark tea? If yes, why? If not, why not? Here I give you some ideas how we could analyze. Also, I guide you and I personally state that puer tea doesn't belong to dark tea. Well, you could definitely have your own answer. However, do not just answer yes or no. You should think about that critically. Why? To prove that you are right. This is the sense how we are going to learn the whole lessons. I hope that through our lessons, you learn some knowledges, but also master some method and creative ways. Okay.
Therefore, to either buy some aged puer tea directly or purchase the young puer tea for your self-owned storage is not a simple option, but also a sophisticated skill. It counts on your experience, knowledge, and finance power. Although we may not be involved with processing, through this lesson, however, we can fully understand what is the real quality puer tea with aging potential. If you tasted some flaws or shortage of such tea, you could analyze and know how to solve the problem. Okay? Especially now people that like to store the puer tea. After all, puer tea carries the memory and can be saved, collected as the souvenir. So, to store the puer tea became one of the romantic things. Think about that. The puer tea will grow together with us, and in future, we can share it gradually with our beloved family and friends. Such a great joy and pleasure. What do you think?